I'm calling the meeting to order. We'll do a roll call, if you wouldn't mind starting, Jordan.
Sellergren.
Bowman.
Wagner.
Beck.
Boyd.
DeGraw.
Stork.
Grinsley.
All right, we got those done. Public discussion, anything not on the agenda? Anyone here to talk about something not on the agenda? All right, then we're on to item D, the Certificate of Appropriateness. This is for 1133 East Court Street.
Okay. This project is located here in the Longfellow Historic District. Because about 5 of the commissioners are new from what we had before, I'll talk a little bit about the past 2. We have 2 projects before us, the siding and the windows. As you can see, this house is a 4-square. It has a flared eave or a bell cast roof like we saw on some of the other houses. It has dormers with paired windows. There is a bay projection on the east side. The porch has its original roof and a couple elements of the supporting of the roof, but has otherwise been replaced the columns and the railing with siding. This is the other side of the house. This group of windows might be from a kitchen remodel maybe, but otherwise it's a 4-square with an addition on the back. In the past, we've approved several projects. We've approved some re-roofing, some railing and door alterations to the addition on the back. And most recently, the commission did approve removing the aluminum siding from the porch. And then, because we don't know if there are columns and there might be some missing elements, any of the missing elements were approved to be kind of copied from this house, which is 1152 Court Street. If the columns and everything were there, there wouldn't be anything that needed to be replaced. But if they're not, this at least gives them some direction of how to proceed. As you can see here from the back, so this is from the southeast corner. The original house and the 4-square fit about in this area. And so the division between the addition, which was done before the district was designated, starts somewhere along this wall. You have a 2-story area, you have a 1-story area with a little bit of a 2-story stepped back. And this shows that on the other side about where that division happened. Let's see. Okay, so on December 10th, the commission heard the case to remove the siding, remove the original siding, and to replace it with cement board. And that was regardless of the condition. We had not seen any of the original siding and didn't know that they were there. That application was denied, and instead the commission approved the ability to repair and paint the original siding. Let's see. The applicants then appealed the commission's denial to City Council, and they and their contractor and architect expressed concerns related to the damage to the original siding, which we'll look at, and potential moisture issues due to previously installed modern insulation and the application of the existing synthetic aluminum siding. The homeowners also expressed health concerns related to lead paint that is present on the original siding. City Council heard the initial appeal of the commission's denial on February 2nd, and at that meeting, they continued the public hearing to the next meeting so that staff could meet at the applicant's house, have some of the siding removed, and see what the condition of the original siding was. On February 16th, then, the next council meeting, City Council affirmed the decision of the Preservation Commission, but they also directed staff and the commission to create an exception to the guidelines that would assist this homeowner with this particular situation. And then the resulting exception to the guidelines was passed by council in July 2021, this summer. We stepped through in the staff report what that exception is, but we've also sent everyone a copy of it, and I think it was attached as well. Okay, so when we saw the siding, so this was one side of the house. This area of the siding and insulation was removed. And on the other side around the bay, the aluminum siding was also removed. Here we saw a narrow lap. As you can see, this is one of the holes that was created in the siding to install the insulation. There's peeling paint. You see a little bit of the weathered wood in this area. It's on a projecting bay. One would expect to see that weathered wood there. Going back to the other side, and we'll show some details. Basically, you have the wall. It looks like the trim has been cut off or removed, probably to install the aluminum. There's something missing with the water table here. It might have been removed. Maybe it had a detail that flared out or something that had to be removed to install the aluminum. We don't know. And we wouldn't know unless we found some evidence somewhere else. We were able to see at that time that under this corner cap from the aluminum siding, that the siding was mitered at the corners. And that is also what they have here. So in all of the transitions from one plane to another, there is not a corner board. The siding comes to a point and is mitered. And that is also something that will come up in the discussion tonight. We were also able to see for the first time that the front wall inside the porch has its original siding, and we can clearly see the original trim condition there. It's in good condition. This is generally what we saw. This is on that the larger wall, that west wall. You see peeling paint, some of the older paint with multiple layers. You see some more adhered paint that would have probably been, fewer layers. It was put on at one point in time when, the house needed to be painted. You can also see some of the bare wood here from where the paint is falling off. And then this is that area where we would normally or typically see a trim board with a little drip cap over it, which is the water table, and it's not there. It does step out here a little bit, which is really the only reason why we expect that maybe it had some kind of a cant at the bottom. Here, under one of the windows, looks like there's some plywood or something up in here, so really the trim around the windows is not evident at all. It might have been removed and replaced with this plywood to block it out for the trim. It's hard to say. You see again holes, and this would have been from the installation of the insulation. Here's a close-up of that corner on the bay. Again, could be that some of these pieces were replaced at some point in time because you have a pretty evident gap there. And this is on the west side, and this is towards the back, and this is where the new addition connects to the original historic house. You have the historic foundation, the new foundation, you have the historic siding. It probably came to a corner and mitered like the front corner, oops. But in order to install the sheathing and everything over the new addition, they just cut off the end of the siding and pieced in here. Since they were putting aluminum over the whole building, they did not line the house up so that the siding could align. The sheathing here is in the same plane as, well, probably as this insulation. This is looking at the front corner. It's under here that we were able to see that there are miters. Again, this is just generally the condition of the siding. Okay. I'll go through a little bit of this then. Okay, so a part of the project is I think, yeah, we'll talk about the windows at the end because I put the slides for those at the end. Basically, what's going on here is because of the fact that their architect wrote letters about the technical difficulties of removing the aluminum siding and having a siding on the house that would have any integrity, that would last any length of time at all. The claim is that the historic breathable building system has been altered. Insulation was added. There's no ability to put a vapor barrier on the inside to prevent the water and moisture from people living in the house from migrating into the wall cavity, where it would then condense with the temperature change and make the insulation wet. So this wall system is going to have this inherent moisture that cannot be removed without removing the insulation, and that's not an optimal case. So because of this, they're saying that the wood will always be deteriorated and it needs to be replaced with something that can handle this condition, that won't be damaged by moisture. So the plan is to then remove the siding, put Tyvek or a vapor barrier of some kind between it and a new siding, preventing the moisture from getting to this new siding. At the same time, the application was to install LP Smart Side. The contractor has since come forward to say that LP Smart Side cannot match the lap of the existing siding. It's thicker, it's wider, and it also cannot be cut to a miter and then be primed and treated to keep its warranty. Once you cut the product, it would be cut to a sharp edge. It wouldn't have the integrity. It wouldn't have the factory seal coat on it. And so that would, LP Smart Side won't work in that instance. So we not only have the exception to allow the removal of the original siding in order to have something that can respond to the technical issues of the situation. We also have an exception to allow the alteration of the trim condition on the house. So the uncommon situation here is the fact that wood is the only material that'll match the lap and have a mitered corner. And the architect and contractor are saying that wood will not be suitable. It would also be much more expensive in this situation. So the uncommon situation is to approve a change to the trim condition so that instead of having the mitered corners, we have a corner board. That goes onto the corner of the house, allowing the siding to just butt up into that corner. It no longer has to be mitered. So the fact that LP Smart Side can be in just a, it's straight manufactured end and not be cut to that miter could be allowed here. Also, it will allow them to use a wider lap than the current lap, which is like 2 1/4 inches. So at that corner, the front of the house and the porch will remain because it does not meet the conditions from the first exception that it's never been covered by aluminum. It has not been damaged by the installation of the insulation. So this front area is remaining. When you get to the corner, you'll have a corner board and then you'll transition to the modern siding. Staff believes that they are meeting the conditions for both exceptions. And so the recommendation, the recommended motion is a long one, and I'll step through that with you in a few minutes. Let me see if I missed anything here in this part, except for the windows. So in order to meet the first exception, to remove the siding, the commission needs to verify or affirm that it meets the conditions of the exception. Synthetic siding covers the original wood siding. Evidence of technical or economic challenges is noted related to the deteriorated condition of the original wood siding or the impact that rehabilitation may have on building performance, health, or safety. I'm sure the owner will present on this as well. The architect's memo or letter that they also included in the appeal is also evidence towards that. And then finally, if the original wood siding is removed, it must be replaced with an appropriate material that matches in exposure, texture, and design. And that's where the contractor came back and said that the proposed material cannot do that. And because the fact that the only material that can is wood, we proposed an exception to the guidelines to allow that change so that it does not need to match in exposure and design it at least through that trim condition of the corner. Okay. Oh, and here they are again. I'm sorry, I wrote that out in a slide for you. We can return to that at some point if you need it. Okay, so the other thing is the windows. This house has generally individual windows. Here we have a gang of 3 windows, which again I think is probably from a kitchen remodel at some point in time. And the proposal is to add a gang of 3 windows in this area, this portion of the addition. While typically the house has, you know, maybe paired in the dormers and individual otherwise, staff does not find an issue with putting a gang of 3 windows in this area. They would be separated by trim like all other windows that are ganged together. And additionally, they would have the same head height as other windows on that floor. And ideally, they would have a sill height matching some other historic windows, not parts of the modern addition that was never reviewed, but some sill height in common with the historic windows on the house. In addition, the guidelines do not have an exception that would allow vinyl windows on a contributing house in a historic district, especially with its original windows otherwise. So the new windows would need to be metal-clad wood or wood windows. The windows that were put in for the application, the Anderson windows, the 400 series is about awning or casement, which is not an appropriate type, but they're also a vinyl-clad exterior window. So staff would recommend windows that would meet the guidelines, and that's included in the recommendation. This is, for instance, one of the first floor sill heights that could be matched. It would also be possible to maybe match the overall height of, say, the stair window or something like that. Okay, so the recommended motion first goes through the fact that it uses 2 exceptions. One for siding, based on the technical difficulties in the current configuration as presented in the staff report, and one for uncommon situations based on the limitations of the available materials for the requirement that the new siding must match the old. The project is subject to the following conditions, and these were the conditions that were in the original staff report with a few minor tweaks. The historic exterior is fully documented in photographs by staff once it's exposed. The trim details are reviewed and approved by staff and commission chair. The trim on the addition is installed to match the historic house. And this is where it was altered from the staff report. Corner boards are added to all inside and outside corners and siding transitions. All trim will be wood. One thing I'd like to point out, since there would typically be a frieze board of some kind along the top of the wall. You know, that wasn't uncovered. So there are some trim conditions that do need to be verified, as you know, as well as whether or not the water table is in evidence anywhere. And then finally, the 3 new windows are separated by framing and trim and match the head and sill height of existing historic windows on the house, are double hung windows, and are constructed of wood or metal-clad wood. Since the staff report went out, the applicant sent a copy of their presentation that we emailed to you. We also have that so that we can go through it for the applicant. We can advance the slides. We also have a letter of support that they submitted. I gave you each a copy, and for the audience, there's a copy in the back, and we emailed that to you as well.
Okay, so we just as a reminder on how this runs, we ask any kind of clarifying questions for Jessica. I've got just like 1 or 2 small ones, and then we'll open kind of the public comment. Any members of the public will talk. The applicant will usually goes first if they'd like. We can kind of have a discussion, ask them questions, et cetera. And then once we close the public hearing, it's time for us to start discussing among ourselves and making a decision, but we should avoid kind of talking about how we feel or think until we have heard all of the public comments. So just a reminder for everyone, just so we're all on the same page. So anyone have any other clarifying questions? I've got just 2 small ones.
I just want to be sure I understood what you just said. I just realized this now. The porch will remain covered in the original siding, which is 2 3/4 inches deep, right? Or wide, is that right?
The front wall of the house, which is in that porch, will remain as is, yeah.
2 3/4 inches wide. Then we go around to the sides and the back, and suddenly we're going to be looking at siding that is 4 3/4 inches wide, because it doesn't come in this narrower width.
Correct. Everything else would have a wider end. And we have this is an older sample of LP Smart Side, but it is a sample we got about 4 years ago for a different project. But yes, you're correct.
Is that just in the porch or above the porch on the outside?
The only area where the siding remains that has not been covered with the aluminum is in that porch.
Inside, so above would be 4 inches?
No, on the second floor, it's covered with aluminum, so that would change as well.
So just two questions. One, I'm trying to remember, when we changed the guidelines, one of the recommendations was from the SHPO was to have some kind of definition around technical and economic challenges, and we opted for kind of using the economic tool because it was measurable, essentially. It looked like the staff did that for this case. Is that correct?
So the resolution, as it was approved by council, it is here in detail. Okay. And basically says, like we said before, so let me find. Yeah, the following exception provides flexibility to owners of eligible buildings with existing synthetic siding installed over original wood siding. The city recommends repair of original wood siding over replacement whenever feasible. Removal of the synthetic siding and repair of the original wood siding and trim is often the most sustainable and affordable solution. However, some property owners may have legitimate economic or technical concerns due to the deteriorated condition of the original wood siding or the impact rehabilitation may have on building performance, health, or safety, such as the potential for moisture damage due to the presence of modern insulation. It goes on. There was never a strict definition. It was left for the applicant to make their case that they
Gotcha.
have a technical or economic issue.
Got it. Okay. I may have to revisit that meeting because I thought we asked for a different thing. So that's.
And I can't answer that question. I don't know.
That's fine. No. That's just a. But that's fine. My other question was around the on the recommended motion number 2, the trim details are reviewed by, approved by staff and commission chair. Do the trim details include the corner boards? Are they part of the trim details that we would approve?
Yeah, yeah, all of that.
All of that. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that that was the case.
Yeah, and it would be a standard dimension for that.
Yep. And then my final piece is we have to, just in terms of how we're thinking about this as we're processing, some of this is to help us, right? So we look at this on the staff report, make sure we have to affirm that synthetic siding's there. We have to affirm there's evidence of technical and economic challenges. And we have to talk about the replacement materials. And then we also have to we have to think of this is an uncommon situation, which I know comes up in our guidelines from time to time, sometimes it's related to, lot size, sometimes it's related to just missing materials or other things that we can make exceptions that they're especially not precedent setting because it's related to a very narrow, uncommon situation. So we have to find that as well because we're not meeting number 3 on the
Correct.
thing.
Yes, that's the reason for the second exception is because the materials cannot meet the condition of number 3.
Right. Okay. Great. I just wanted to make sure I was thinking about that.
And we've had that in other situations, for instance, with a house where, an addition was never reviewed and it was actually set off to the side and we had to use the uncommon situations for issues on approving that house because it could not meet some of our basic guidelines that we do exactly to avoid that type of situation. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, it is used specifically for
Things that you're just
unusual issues
that you
are
can't
not-
kind of anticipate all of when you're writing the guidebook. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions, clarifying questions for Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, can we ask questions later, too?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
I'll wait.
This is just, I was just trying to help, anything that we just did I understand that correctly? How am I thinking about this? Just the stuff you presented.
And could I add just one more point to
Yep.
the process? Before you deliberate really too much, you should make a motion and have a motion on the table to deliberate.
So once we close
Instead of having all of your deliberation and then a motion at the very end and vote and pass it, you should make the motion earlier in your discussion.
For the public, we've been doing some individual meetings with the city attorney and commission members. I think a lot of the commissions are doing just to make sure we're kind of doing the process right. And that was one of the flags for us that we had. I think everything else we've been doing pretty along the lines, but that was the one tweak they suggested. So with that, we'll open the public comment. The applicant is welcome to speak, does not have to, but now would be the time to do it. Or any members of the public if the applicant does not want to.
You would just come forward and then sign in on that paper. And do you want me to bring that up then, the PDF?
Yeah, that'd be
Okay.
great.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, so I'm Adam Clore. I'm the homeowner at 1133 East Court Street. We have a short presentation here to clarify some of the issues here and to really kind of reinforce the reasoning that we have, why we are so passionate about doing the house in this way and why we think this exception is warranted. So we could go to the next slide, please.
Okay, I told you I thought I had that figured out there.
And just roughly the current status of the house, I won't go through this slide too much because Jessica did a very nice job of presenting that. If we can just go on to the next slide here. There's a few slides that kind of overlap with what was presented, so I'll skip that in the interest of time here. Just examples of the house. I think these are exactly the same picture, so we can skip through these too.
Yeah, I'll scroll, I'm sorry.
Sure, that's fine. One thing just to note here too, the original siding here, it's actually steel siding. I think it was misprinted as aluminum, but the steel siding here was also damaged quite a bit during the derecho last year. So this is the west exposure of the house here. You can see there's a lot of pitting and denting in there. So if we can go to the next slide. Again, just kind of zooming in on the wood siding in the historic part of the house here. We do see, a fair amount of damage in this, at least in our opinion with this. If we can move to the next slide, please. And the other thing that we are very concerned with here is the lead-based paint that is present in this. And we really believe strongly in ensuring that we don't have lead-based contamination, and particularly lead-based contamination for our children. So it's one of the things that has really worried us with any of the historic restorations here. If we can move to the next slide, please. This is some of the damage underneath the siding too. This is near the corner. This would be in the northwest corner of the house. You can see a little bit of water damage on the bottom in here. Next slide, please. So our proposal here is to, as was said, to remove the damaged siding and add a moisture barrier. We want to be able to prevent moisture from entering the house from the outside. We also want to be able to seal the holes and the nooks and crannies that have been created during all of these different processes, particularly the insulation going in here. We want to be able to block those up because one of the other big problems that we have is a lot of pest infiltration, particularly bats getting in through the walls. Doing this conforms with, we believe, with Iowa City Historic Preservation requirements, and it also conforms with building codes and the best practices that are set forth in building and in the Climate Action Committee here. Preventing air infiltration from the outside of the house using something like Tyvek is recommended in modern building codes and in the Climate Action Committee to try and limit the amount of air infiltration that happens in the house. But really, what we are doing here is deferring to the real experts as we see it in the field. We have two experts that are working with us. One of those is Michael Nolan. Michael is an architect in the area. He's worked on many historic projects in several historic districts here, and he's worked with the council many times. G.T. Carr has served on the council. He's our siding guy. Again, has decades of experience applying siding and working in historic areas. So we're deferring to people that we think are much more knowledgeable than ourselves about this. And the people that are knowledgeable about this, both Michael and GT, are the ones recommending the removal of the siding, putting Tyvek on, and then replacing that with an approved siding substitute, something that's approved by HPC. This is supported by staff, as per the memorandum from October 8th, as I'm sure you all have seen. And this is also supported by our neighbors. If we go to the next slide, please. The letter that was included just a few days ago has signatures from the neighbors whose houses are shown in green around our yellow property here. This includes the owner, Jim Hayes, of the Grant Wood House. And I know in other meetings this was brought up as, the proximity of our house to the Grant Wood House, raised concern for several people on the committee here. So knowing that we have Jim's support in this and the other support of our neighbors is important to us with this process. And I should clarify, the support that they're giving is to remove the wood siding and to replace that with historically approved siding. Next slide, please. What we're asking for here is not an exception. We don't believe that this is an exception. What we're asking for is a reasonable remedy. The guidelines, even prior to the modifications that happened this summer, allowed for reasonable remedies to be applied, and I'll show examples of that happened, again, prior to the changes to the rules this summer. Reasonable remedies that allow substitutive material like the ones that we want to use. In addition to that, the Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation, for which a lot of the Iowa City guidelines are based on, also have reasonable exceptions, or not exceptions, but allowances for reasonable remedies in there, and specifically call out taking into account economic and technical feasibility when looking at these reasonable remedies. Next slide, please. I won't go into detail with this. You've all had Mike Nolan's write-up, and this is just a quote from that. But again, what I want to reinforce is that we are relying on experts who have decades of experience working in and actually doing hands-on work restoring and maintaining historical structures in this area. Next slide, please. This was brought up the first time that we brought this in front of the commission, is that there are places, staff, both Jessica and other staff in the city have recognized that these problems have occurred, and I'll show you several examples of these problems that have occurred and the things that we want to avoid here. So it's not just our people, it's not just our contractors and our architects, it's also people within the city that recognize exceptions and have allowed these exceptions to happen in the past. Next slide, please. So again, this is the type of damage that we're worried about underneath the siding, the damage from water, particularly in corners, and particularly when you have mitered corners, as is present on our house. Next slide, please. And again, this is just a similar pattern of this. Obviously, we can't see as much of it in this slide. Next slide, please. The other very important and very disturbing problem that we've seen with this is, again, the infiltration of insects. And we thought part of this would have been a roof-related problem. We were able to replace the roof and seal all of the entries in the roof itself after that was replaced after damage from the derecho. Unfortunately, this summer, bats still got in, and Gosha ended up having to go through a series of rabies vaccinations to prevent any potential exposure to rabies here. And again, one of the things that came out of that was a deep concern from her doctor, just for the safety of the people in the house, and recommended that we remedy this as soon as possible. So again, this is a safety issue. We want to make sure that all of the holes in the siding and any place that particularly bats can enter the house are sealed so that our 3 children don't have to experience what Gosha did. Next slide, please. The cost of the renovations here is also something that is very concerning to us. So the economics of this, and looking through this, we're already $2,000 into this. That's basically the cost of removing the siding in the wintertime for inspection. If we are going to restore the wooden siding and follow EPA guidelines for removal of the lead-based paint, that's about $12 per square foot. We have 1,600 square feet. So that would be another $20,000. The cost of replacing additional wooden siding and the other costs associated with this total to $67,000. And I know it's been brought up that there are grants that are available. I believe those grants max out at $5,000. So if we take that away from it and we even say it's $62,000 instead of $65,000, this is a huge bundle of money. And in doing this with the existing wooden siding would go against our expert recommendations that we have. It wouldn't allow us to have the moisture barrier in there, so it allows the potential for damage and moisture to occur. It allows pests to still enter the house, and it's going to require frequent rescraping and repainting, which re-exposes everybody to toxic lead again. So we see a technical, an economic, and a safety issue in retaining the wooden siding, and that's why we were so passionate about removing this and replacing it with something that retains the look and character of the house, but allows us to live in a safer environment. Next slide, please. So there's several examples here of similar projects that have been approved by HPC. Some of you may have seen some of these before, so I'm sorry for the repetition, but this is a house on Seymour Avenue. It's about 2 blocks away from us. This is a house that had, I believe, vinyl siding on it, and underneath that was historical siding of some type. The approval, if you read through the minutes of this, and I have these if you guys want to refer to those, the approval for this allowed the removal of both the vinyl siding and any siding underneath it prior to seeing the condition of the siding. So this is an example of allowing removal of not just the vinyl siding but the historic siding, and allow it to be replaced with a very similar type of material that we want to use. This is, I believe this is cement board siding, very similar to the LP we want to use. Next slide, please. There's 2 houses on Clark Street. They're both next to each other. This is the first house. I can't quite remember the address. 525 Clark Street, I think. What was that? 427 Clark Street. This is a house that had wooden siding on there. The paint was unable to after repainting, was unable to adhere because of moisture issues. Identical to our house, this house has no moisture barrier on the interior walls. Identical to our house, this house has blown-in cellulose insulation. And identical to our house, this has wood siding on the outside of it. So this is a perfect example of the type of failure that we are trying to avoid here. This house was again replaced with cement board siding. Next slide, please. This is the house right next to it. This was another house that again had blow-in insulation, had no vapor barrier on the inside, and had wood siding on there. And again, this is another house where the wood siding failed, and an exception was made to, or rather a remedy was made that allowed cement board siding to be used on the house. So again, two examples of exactly the same situation that we're facing and exactly what we want to avoid happening, trying to repaint something, having it fail within a few years, and then having to replace it. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Finally, the last example I want to bring up is unrelated to siding, but is related to the range of exceptions that are allowed and that have been passed by this commission. So this is a house on Summit Street, one of our most historic streets in town. And this is a house that had a lot of change done, particularly to the porch on the house. If you look at this, most of the features of the porch are changed from the original on the left to what it is now on the right. Both the railing, some of the structural features, and many parts of this were changed. And these were changed because the owner of the house wanted more light to come in. So this porch had a removal of the historic wood that was on here. The historic wood was not damaged. It was not degraded. This was removed at the wish of the homeowner, and this was recommended by staff, and this was approved by the commission. So if things like this can be approved, where it's to the level of wanting more light in, I find it hard to believe that we can't approve things where there's technical problems, where there's safety issues, and when there's economic infeasibility involved in this. Next slide, please. This is just excerpts from the Summit Street discussion that happened here. Some of the commission's excerpts. Next slide, please. And finally, I want to just circle back to what we really want to do here. What we want to do, what we've always wanted to do, is restore the historic character of the house. We're not trying to modernize the house. We're not trying to change it. We're trying to bring it back to what it was in 1924. But we want to do it with modern materials in a way that is safe for our family, in a way that will last for generations, so that everyone can enjoy this, not just for a few years, but for decades to come. So this is an example of the cement board siding versus the existing siding that we have on our house. Next slide, please. This is an example of the Bullwinkle's house. This is the house that is kitty corner to us, and what the porch is going to look like. We see this as an example of what our house could look like as well. Looking at this is a house that has the corner boards on it, like we were proposing here and like staff is recommending. And again, this is just across the street. This is just east of the Grant Wood house, if you guys want to kind of an idea of where this is at. And this is the type of thing that we want to see. Next slide, please. These are just, again, a few examples of historic homes, not necessarily the type of thing we're looking for here. Obviously, this is a very different style than our Foursquare. But this is just examples of using LP siding on historic homes and presenting a historic look to homes after this type of siding has been applied. Next slide, please. This is similar examples with cement board siding. So again, a very similar product. And again, something that looks, I think, just wonderful. Next slide, please. This is the real reason, that we are so passionate about this. Again, we want to avoid lead paint in our house because of these three girls here, our daughters. And we want to have something sustainable so that we can age in place in our house, so that we can spend decades here, and so we can have a safe environment for everyone. Next slide, please. So in summary, we want to restore the historic character of the house. we want to have the same opportunities that were given to the examples that I showed earlier, the one on Clark Street, the one on Summit Street, and the one on Seymour. And you know, before we wrap up here, I want to thank staff. I want to thank particularly Tracy and Ann Russett, and the building inspectors, and of course GT Carr and Mike Nolan, who have helped us with so much of their expertise and guidance in this process. And then before I'm done, I think Gosha has a few things she wanted to say as well.
So I'm an epidemiologist, and so that
And Gosha, please sign in also.
I did.
Okay,
Thanks. And this is what sort of strikes me. Do you know what the safe blood level is for children? There is no safe level. And there's 76% of children in Iowa have unsafe blood level. And this is from JAMA Pediatrics from September 27th this year. And I don't know if you have kids. We have 3. I am not willing to take any risk to expose them to lead. Similar, do you know what the fatality rate is from rabies?
Could you speak up, please, a little bit? I can't.
Fatality rate from rabies. Do you know what it is? It's 99.9%. Just last month in Illinois, a man refused to get rabies shots like I did in April and died a month after exposure. 2016, a 77-year-old woman in Wyoming woke up with a bat on her neck, no bites. They grabbed the bat, threw it out the window. A month later, she was in the hospital for 8 days and died from it. I don't know at what point the kids will have a bat in the room. I think it's a matter of time. And if we don't catch it, if we don't know about it, a month later, one of our kids, God forbid, may be dead. It's not the roof issue. I thought it was. We had 2 different pest control companies come out. They looked at the roof. The roof has been replaced after the ratio. All the entrances through the roof, we thought that's where they were coming in, were sealed. It's not the roof issue. There are gaps under the metal siding where they're crawling in. And I'm not willing to take that risk. And if we don't fix this home, if we can sell it, the market is awesome, we could make a ton of money on it, then we pass it on to the next family. And again, I would not be able to live with myself knowing that I'm exposing other people to that. So this is not an aesthetic issue. We're not trying to make this into this, fancy McMansion. We're trying to make sure that this home is safe and looks, like the other homes in the neighborhood. Actually, the Bullwinkle's home, this is exactly what we're proposing. Yes, the siding exposure will be slightly different, but it has the corner boards. We want to copy the porch that he has in his home. That's all we're asking. And so I urge you to vote for it. And frankly, if we can't do what we want to save this home and save, and keep our family safe, I honestly don't. I wouldn't if we can rent it. I guess I don't know, but I would not want to pass this on to the next family. When we bought this home, it was a rental. The owner lived in Texas. And we've been fixing and reinstalling historic features. And Frank, you've been in a house, you've seen that. We really, really want to take care of it the proper way. Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have any questions for the property owners before we open up to more public? Sorry. Do we have any questions for the property owners before we open up to more public comment? We can ask. They're not obligated to answer, but we certainly can.
I had a couple that occurred to me as I was preparing for this meeting. Is the insulation that's currently in the walls of your house wet? Does it have moisture problems now? I thought I read in an earlier evaluation of the house that it was dry. You're just concerned about moisture getting in, right?
If you're gonna, we're gonna need you to come back up to the mic if you're gonna.
So I'm not sure if I heard you.
Oh, I seem to recall having read in an earlier evaluation of the house that the insulation about which you are concerned in the walls, the potential for its getting damp. Is it currently damp?
Last time when we opened up the walls to fix the electrical, yes, it was.
It was, okay. And let me see. When you take, if you take off the synthetic siding and then the wood clapboards, will you also remove that insulation then from the
No, that's-
interior walls?
No, I mean, there was a reason why it was put in. I think if we removed it, the girls' bedroom would be 40 degrees in the winter. And with, the Climate Action Committee that essentially requires more insulation to be put in.
In the
Right,
attic,
so we will be
yes.
burning more, gas to warm the home from which we would remove the insulation. So we literally would be doing the two things that they are opposing.
As I understand it, the Smart Side, LP Smart Side material doesn't breathe, is that right, as far as you know, too?
I'm not an expert on that. I think I would defer to GT Carr, but the siding itself is not sealed. There are laps of siding, and those laps of siding lay on one another. So I would defer to those guys, but I believe it does breathe.
There's usually a rain screen installed actually behind, so there would be a gap for the water to run
There's a
out.
vapor barrier that
There's a
they
vapor
recommend
barrier,
be
so
re-
there's Tyvek, there's pieces of wood that are installed to which then the siding is attached, and there's a tiny little gap where any moisture and water can run out.
Wouldn't that be an entry point for bats to get into the house, too? They
No,
can
it's
get
all-
in
it's
a
all sealed
fraction
in
of
the
an
bottom.
inch.
Well, that's why you have behind that a rain barrier. That's where the Tyvek comes in, and that's where the ceiling, comes in.
And then part of it would be that we would be able to see the sheathing, and we can't see the sheathing, which are the big boards underneath the siding. And we know they have holes in them. I mean, you saw some of them, they've been drilled through.
Well, it
I'm
looks-
assuming that's how they're coming in.
Yeah, it looks as though you have, in most places, a paint problem rather than a wood problem. The wood looks to be in remarkably good shape, except in a few places where moisture has penetrated and where the holes were put in for to blow in the insulation. But those can be plugged with wooden plugs. I don't know. I just wonder.
That would not solve the insulation issue.
And I guess rather than trying to hypothesize about this, we're not experts in this. Other than Frank Wagner here, I don't think anyone on the board has practical experience, doing this. This is why we are relying on experts in the field, like GT Carr and like Mike Nolan, for the technical recommendations for them.
Actually, I do have a little experience with this because I live in a house that's just a little bit older than yours, where we had a similar situation with lead paint and solved it. But I won't go into that.
If you've got questions.
I have more
okay.
questions, yes. In your cost estimate to replace the wood, was that on the whole house?
That was replacing wood on the section of the house that has no wood. And
Just the addition then?
And restoring wood. There was replacement of wood on the original portion of the house, but that is the window and trim, not the siding.
And boards that would have deteriorated to the point where they needed replacing. So that $24,000 is just for the addition,
That
to
is for
put
the
wood on
addition, that
it?
is for the cost of the wood and the installation of the wood.
Okay. Okay, I guess those are my only questions right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions? It doesn't seem like we do. So,
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Any other members of the public want to speak? I know we've got a couple of folks here. You're not obligated to. I'm just offering to make sure that we're not missing out. All right. Well, I'm going to close the public comment and time for us to discuss, which means, thank you, Jessica. If we could get a motion on the floor and then we can talk about it.
Motion to discuss.
No, we make this motion, the recommended motion, and then second it, and then we discuss it, and then if we can amend it if we need to, et cetera, before we vote on it at the end. So
Okay.
that's the recommendation from If you could do this one, because there's a slight difference.
I
Okay,
did try to make it as readable as possible. I'm sorry about that.
okay. There's a screen.
Yeah, we've got a little screensaver thing in the
Video
middle of
input.
ours, so.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I don't know why.
If you could maybe just, oh, it doesn't scroll yet, okay. Oh, it's back, we're good, I think.
I see it went away.
Good.
DeGraw, I move to approve a certificate of appropriateness for the project at 1133 East Court Street through 2 exceptions. One for siding based on technical difficulties in the current configuration as presented in the staff report, and one for uncommon situations based on the limitations of the available materials for the requirement that the new siding must match the old. The project is subject to the following conditions. The historic exterior is fully documented in photographs by staff once it is exposed. 2, the trim details are reviewed and approved by staff and commission chair. The trim on the addition is installed to match the historic house, and corner boards added to all inside and outside corners and siding transitions. All trim will be wood. 3, the new windows are separated by framing and trim and match the head and sill height of existing historic windows on the house, are double-hung windows, and are constructed of wood or metal-clad wood.
Beck, seconds.
All right, time for discussion. If there is any.
I have some thoughts about the bat and the lead paint issue, which is, I mean, I absolutely sympathize with those issues, being somebody who lives in a house with lead paint and bats. But I don't necessarily believe that those are strong enough arguments to fully support the requests of the applicant. And I probably move a bat or 2 out every year, and we're dealing with lead paint as well. I think it's the nature of choosing to live in an old house. So those are some thoughts of mine, just specifically regarding those 2 issues. I don't know that they can be avoided.
I have another thought on the moisture issue. In terms of putting a vapor barrier, that can be done according to the historic preservation documents and local contractors I've talked to and painters. Moisture issues, you can create a moisture barrier without having to rip apart your walls by putting oil-based paint on your interior wall. Oil-based paint acts as a vapor barrier, preventing the moisture from within the house migrating through the walls.
Yeah, I mean, okay, sorry, go ahead. Do you have more, Cecile?
Yeah, but I don't want to occupy the whole thing. Others might go ahead and say something before me.
I mean, I just want to make sure we're very focused on what there's a lot of, sorry, I'm not speaking like, I think there's a lot of, trying to figure out how to say this in a way that, I think there's a lot of other issues that have been brought up, and what we have in front of us is, does the motion meet our guidelines? That is like really what we're deciding.
Yep.
The other issues I think are important context, and I think helpful to understand the more full picture. But our task at hand is to take a look and does the applicant meet our guidelines? And we have this new exception. I take issue with the city staff's characteristic of the intent of the rewrite. I was at that meeting. They did not say an intent. It was really about climate change, but that's neither here nor there. So we have this new exception. It meets it in the first 2, and I am trying to figure out if, to me, the thing that I'm weighing right now is this an uncommon situation based on the limitation of the materials, right? That's the thing that I am weighing, and the thing that I'm trying to, I would love other thoughts on, because if we meet that uncommon situation, we can meet this piece, right? That's the thing that I'm trying to weigh.
A quick follow-up question. Are you concerned that this would set a precedent that would cause problems in the future? Is this part of what you're weighing at this point?
Well, our work is not precedent setting, right? I know it was referenced, but it isn't,
But it's already been cited as precedent setting.
It can be, but it can't be what we weigh, right? I mean, it's not actually, right? People can say anything they want, Cecile, but it's
And the precedents that were cited, two or three of them were in conservation districts where the requirements are very much looser. But yes, anytime you approve something in this commission, you are creating a precedent that someone is going to refer to, just as the Summit Street House was referred to as precedent setting.
Right.
And so this one is justifiably.
Right. We should not consider those precedents because we don't do that. That's not how we operate, right? So people can cite them. They can cite all kinds of things that we don't. To me, we have to decide, does this meet the guidelines as they exist?
Technically, it is to review each property individually against the guidelines, and technically, precedents aren't set. We do, however, if things tend to make a certain consensus, get approved the same over and over again, sometimes that gets recognized so that those types of projects don't come to the commission anymore. They're reviewed by staff, but it's a different type of situation.
Right. So what we're trying to do is review this as proposed based on the guidelines. And I do, to your point about precedent setting, I think the thing that makes this an additional exception is the exception for the uncommon situations, right? Like, that's not necessarily going to be the case in other places. Certainly, it could be. There could be another uncommon situation, but that's what I'm weighing, if it is an uncommon situation, or if it's an uncommon situation that's created, could be avoided, I think, is the.
Well, that is sort of my question. I mean, the premise that this is an uncommon situation, I mean, some of what we're weighing here is expert assessment, is the wood savable or not? And there have been different assessments of it, and the homeowners present a pretty clear assessment. Do we have reason to doubt the assessments that's been presented, essentially? Or want another opinion? Again, I don't know if that ever happens in this case, but I'm saying, is there a reason to doubt the materials in the packet that have been presented to us?
Yeah, that's really up to the commissioners to weigh whether or not they believe it or not. That's the only way that we can kind of do this. I think, Carl asked me about that a couple meetings ago. And so that's really up to each of us individually to weigh.
Just a comment from me. This is Thoman. My goodness, looking at the photos, and they're photos. I have not been to your property. I have not walked around. But seeing that old siding and feeling like it maybe is in pretty good shape, that tugs at me a little bit, and that's a hard one for me to grapple with, too. If we remove that siding, then too, does it have a life beyond this? Can it have a life beyond this? And there again, I'm looking outside of the project itself, but I think that's one of our targets, is to keep things from the landfill too. So that's looking beyond, I guess, if we talk about taking down that siding, which that's relic siding. I imagine that wood is something you just can't get, and that's kind of what you're saying too. You can't get that wood anymore. I don't know. That's just a comment.
There's something I'm still a little bit confused about. It seems like there's the recommended motion does not involve taking the siding off as it is. It involves covering it, or is that not correct?
No, it would involve taking off the original wood siding, yes.
Got it. Okay.
And it is already assumed that the aluminum would come off because they have had approval for that.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Or a steel, I'm sorry.
What's the point of the first item? The historic exterior is fully documented in photographs by the staff once it is exposed. Okay, what does that mean?
That's particularly something that we just do for some of our record keeping. You know, if we know that a property is going to come down for some reason, we try to document it completely. Same thing here. If we're going to remove original material, we document it. Partly because we learn from it. It is also part of the history of the neighborhood. And so, yeah, we just fully document original things, historic things that are removed.
The applicant stated that they hope in this project to return the house to its original appearance, to make it an historic house, and yet the way they're going about it, that's not what they're going to end up with if they're using a material which is not recommended by the Historic Trust, and secondly, which causes style changes to be made on the house in terms of the way the edges come together, the mitered corners come together. And you'd have, as I said earlier, you end up with a material where you have one width of siding on one part of the front of the house, and then a wider width of siding on the top part of the house. And that doesn't seem to me to be making the house look like it did when it was built. It's quite the contrary.
I agree that's a little unfortunate, the width of the siding and losing the mitered corners. But they will be adding the trim details around the windows. And that's not there right now, I don't believe. So I think that's an improvement.
Well, those were probably lopped off when they put the steel siding on.
Yeah,
mean,
so,
go ahead.
So further clarification, the windows will be changed from vinyl, what they currently are, to a cement board trim, like a historic style trim?
The windows on the house currently have kind of, again, an aluminum or metal of some kind trim, manufactured trim that's on them, and that will be removed.
Okay.
And wood trim will be installed to match the trim that's seen on the front porch area.
Jessica, could you go back to a picture of those, of the windows? It was like that. You can't really zoom in, though.
No, somewhere I thought there was a close-up one of that one.
My hunch is they probably have the original wood around the windows. It's just that the bed mold and the drip edge on the top and the windowsill along the bottom were probably lopped off when they put on, as was the water table and the drip edge below down there that you're showing. That is typical, that when aluminum, steel, vinyl siding goes on, that stuff gets chopped off. And in your recommendation, you say request that around the windows will be wood. So you can have a wood bed mold, wood drip cap, refabricate. That was done on College Street, on John Romhart did that. Yellow, southern yellow pine windowsills reattached to get that dimension. That one house that came up, the Bullwinkle's home, I mean, theirs is essentially what they're requesting. However, they do have the 2 1/4 inch siding on that house, which, you know, at least it's closer to what we have. I'm pretty, I mean, because if the window trim is either going to be 3 1/2, 4 inches wide, it's going to be 4 1/4, so it's thicker, but if I look at that, that is 2 1/4 inch siding on there, and it's wood. You know, maybe rather than, you could maybe change the trim details, but instead of going with LP, because you can't get that effect, that exposure, then go with, you can still get cedar siding, that's the narrower boards. But that's changing the...
Right, the contractor had come back in between the last meeting when this was deferred and this meeting and said, not only, of course, that the LP wouldn't work because it couldn't be mitered in that depth, but they can't use wood because part of what they're trying to do with their technical difficulties is get rid of the use of wood.
Oh. Wait, I'm sorry. The trim details are wood, though. That is.
The trim itself will be
Oh, okay,
wood.
yes,
We're
right.
talking about the siding.
Oh, okay.
Assuming that the moisture and any damage to the wall cavity will not impact LP the same as it would wood.
Yep.
That was my
The
interpretation.
moisture wouldn't affect the wood trim, though. Okay.
Sarah, I think you were getting ready to say something before we got down this roadmap of this other conversation. Anyway.
I'm not pleased to approve a project like this, but I'm also weighing the variables of how the expensive side of it can become very expensive if, so there's removing the paint, if taking off the metal siding, removing the lead-based paint, and then if the wood is painted again and it is indeed found that the paint job will fail and it has to be painted frequently, that side of the project looks expensive to me. So I have a sympathy with someone trying to budget and looking at that as a potential expense. Then the other variable is the expense of matching the back end of the house that was done in a different style with the original front of the house. I guess part of my thinking is you never know what's going to happen when you take off the metal siding and then get down to what's there. So while I'm not pleased to think about LP siding going on, I can see that it's kind of a clean application minus many of the variables that I start to think through if they did it in a purely historic fashion.
LP siding needs painting too. It's in their product brochure.
I know it needs painting, but it's the idea that if the moisture problem that's caused by the insulation affects the wood and the paint that goes on the wood, causing the paint job to fail repeatedly. It could be that the oil-based paint that you said on the inside, but there's just like so much juggling back and forth. I just feel sympathetic at a certain point and go, LP siding, okay. Even though I'm not happy to say that.
Yeah, my concern is not really the LP siding. It's really I'm struggling with that uncommon condition to approve the other piece, and I'm not sure that I feel like we may have an uncommon situation. I'm leaning that direction, but I am appreciating the thoughts. I think as what you were describing, Sherry, was helping me recognize that there's a lot of conditions here that collectively, it's not just one thing, it's kind of a cascading of issues that kind of create that uncommon condition here that makes this a real exception and not something that we would want to see again unless we had a series of cascading issues. I think collectively those kind of create that uncommon condition.
And we anticipate this would remain uncommon if more people were to come ahead with the similar issues with their own homes?
Well, I think it's to be determined, right? I mean, I suppose we could see a whole bunch of folks come in with a series of cascading issues. I mean, that could happen, right? I don't know that we can decide that tonight, and we can view those cases. You know, they're not going to be the exact same. There's no, there's not going to be a addition that's flush with the thing, and there's just about 15 different things going on here.
Fair.
And there may be 15 different things going on, but they're not going to be the exact same. And I think us or future commissions can weigh those individually as they should.
I'm not suggesting that we do this tonight or before taking a vote, but in general, would we recommend to people who might want to argue that they fall into this uncommon exception, that they have their architect or other assessment expert come in to represent the details of their case?
Yeah, sometimes people do.
I guess this just demonstrates the importance of good stewardship of houses. This house is a victim of poor stewardship from before this family lived there.
The Texas
and
the Texas
that makes
owners.
things more complicated and more expensive. So.
anyway, I'm inclined to support. I think we've hit the uncommon exception, and that we meet them. So that's where I'm at. We don't have to, no one has to say anything until we're ready to vote. I just have through a conversation decided where I'm at. Again, because it's, I think, multiple uncommon situations creating us into one scenario.
Could you review what those are again?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I think there's multiple issues happening here, Frank. I think the first is the issue around the product availability. I think, and all of right. That's what's driving this is the product availability to have the mitered corners. Right. That's the holdup is the non-mitered corners. To me, I'm fine with the other pieces. We've presented enough with the new guidelines, and so it's about the mitered corners or not mitered corners, and the product availability is. I'm trusting what I have in front of me that it's not available. I think when you pair that with all of the other issues here, in terms of the back of the house being a new addition, that's at a weird. They're kind of in plane in a weird way. I'm not using the right words on that. I'm sorry. It's been a long kind of day, those two in particular, I think. That's
The variable of the insulation, we don't know
thank you,
what will
Sharon.
happen.
Yeah, that was the other. You were the persuasive one for me on that, and I had forgotten it.
With the insulation being there, we don't know if it will continue to cause paint jobs to fail on the exterior of the wood siding or not. If you go to the trouble it's expensive to remove lead-based paint properly. And I'm pretty sure that the city of Iowa City even has stipulations that say you have to create a tent environment. And there are very few people that want to work within the tent environment to remove lead-based paint. And the tent environment makes it so that little kids or anyone won't get exposed to the removal process, except for the people in there doing the removal.
Well, if technically, I think for lead-based paint abatement, even if you remove that siding, you still have to follow lead-based paint removal. If you disturb more than 1 square foot of lead-based paint any place,
Okay.
you have to encapsulate the whole place. And
I would argue that there's just nothing uncommon about lead-based paint on a historic home. Nothing.
Yeah, I think to me it's that we have the blown insulation here, and moisture issues, which has in neighboring houses has failed. I think those three to me are enough of a cumulative, uncommon situation that allows me to think that we've hit that mark. Not everyone has to feel the same way, right? That's the.
You had mentioned something about the material availability. Cedar siding isn't available?
There's a cost element here, the economic and technical challenges, yeah. I'm not excited about this decision, but I think it's the right one.
I think it was almost 28,000, right, just for the partial wood that was removed to replace that?
According to this report, or the presentation, right?
Does that sound right to you, Frank? Because you're in the business.
Yeah, it would be hard to say without, the price of lumber fluctuates a lot, and this last year you couldn't. It's 8-foot 2x4 in August cost $13, and now it's $3. So it's, and some cedar siding you just can't get right now, but that doesn't mean you can't get it. I can look up and see if it's available, but.
One thing that bothers me about this replacement is the wood that's there probably doesn't have a knot hole in it. Ours didn't when we took the lead paint off. Perfectly clear. I didn't want to paint the house. The wood was so beautiful. And they're going to replace that with this stuff which is made of strands of wood fiber with a sheet of paper covering it and rosins over that, which has a lifespan of 50 to 60 years. Whereas the wood, which lasted 110 years, could last another 110 years. So that makes it hard.
Do Do we have more conversation, or are folks ready to vote? I'm asking.
Ready to vote.
All right, are we ready, folks? Or do you have other questions?
I
So,
got nothing.
Can you
Okay.
read it one more time again?
Oh, the motion?
Yeah. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, just give, Jessica, just do I just ask for a vote? Normally we do it right after the motion, so I'm.
Right, I understand. Yeah, just say, all in favor. And if we actually have any no's, then we should actually count and write them down.
Yep.
But otherwise, yeah, just exactly like normal.
All right. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion carries, I guess.
No, I said nay.
Yeah, we have one Kinsley votes no. All right, that's it, we did that. Thank you. All right, on to item E, report on certificates issued by staff and chair.
Okay, we'll go through these kind of quickly. This is 520 Grant Street, and they were replacing their roof shingle. 424 South Summit Street, while we approved a lot of things here, we had not approved the actual roof shingle replacement at that time, so we went back and did that. I'm meeting with them next week on site about the internal gutters. This landmark, the College Block building, is going to have vinyl sign graphics installed on the windows. Which is no material effect because they're removable. For minor review, we had another roof shingle replacement here. This one is from a 3-tab kind of flat shingle to architectural shingles. This house, we approved some things in the past. The windows were going to be repaired, and this individual window and this pair of windows actually will be replaced because of damage to the frame, and one of them was missing a sash, but the frame was damaged as well. Trinity Church is, insurance is helping them replace the roof, and as we reviewed this, the church congregation has had kind of a history of struggle recognizing the historic value of the hall that's along the alley, because it was built at a different time from the main chapel. Both are considered historic. Both are parts of the National Register nomination. There's modern buildings over here which are not considered historic. So once the roof is redone, it'll all be striped, so it'll all be similar. 520 Grant Street is also having another project. It was submitted later. They are replacing the garage floor inside the garage, replacing this pressed steel door, repairing the rear corners of the foundation, and then actually relocating this stair off the side of the deck because water is just pouring at this little tiny garage and leading to the failures that it's been having. And the stairs are a part of that. Intermediate review, we had a long time ago, the commission approved putting this deck on the side of 533 Summit Street, and we approved making it slightly smaller and more porch-like. It was approved as a porch. At that time, we did not really have the same definitions we have now, where a porch has a roof, and we don't have uncovered decks visible. So hopefully making it a little smaller, eventually maybe we might get a roof on it and it'll be a porch. 12, Deluxe, the 50-year-old oven broke. suddenly.
Oh, no.
And they actually had to make the door 2 inches wider to get a new oven in the building. And so we approved it really quick. We did that as an exception because it's an emergency. This is a historic contributing property in a historic district. So normally even that change would come to the commission because of the fact that they were going to have to shut down their business to wait for a meeting.
Yeah.
We did it as a chair and staff review, feeling that a 2-inch change in the size of the door was not going to be recognizable to alter the historic character.
Just one thing, Jessica, just for our new commissioners. We approved, staff and chair approved, but there are concerns about the things that we decided you should raise those, right? I think when Jessica called me about this, I'm like, yeah, we gotta just do this, you know? But we generally, I'm always happy to, and I think Jessica is too, to explain how we got to those decisions. But part of why we do them on the agenda is so that you guys can see the other work that's happening, and A, know about it, and B, if you see something that seems off and not into our guidelines, that's the time to raise those issues. But that's why we present them.
Did that oven fit on those steps?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't there to see. Although I did see on Instagram that they thanked the old fridge and got the old.
Changed,
yeah.
and you didn't.
So, so actually, we go over this because actually I've heard of commissions who have asked for the staff approvals and never gotten them, and the staff won't give them to them. So whatever, we report them, we present them, hopefully to help you know our process, whatever. The stairs actually are. It's kind of an uncommon situation with the zoning code, and if the stairs are removed, they cannot be rebuilt, period. And so they will be repaired forever. Because they actually need them to access the space, but they are in the alley. And so it's possible to go through a sort of an agreement with the city engineers, but because they're on an alley, that might not be likely. So. Because they came up at one point in time to replace them with something that looked more like our guidelines, and it's not possible.
And that door is facing the alley? That's the alley that's
It is like, yeah, this is the alley. So like you enter the alley here, and that door is like back here on the building.
I feel like you could fudge history a bit with those stairs in incremental steps.
Yeah, do that.
Replace the railing
Do it all
at the
the time,
very
Jessica.
least. Anyway. I want to let you guys know that I did find a couple of errors just in the attendance part of the minutes, and I was going to correct them with any changes that you want, and so I will. I think it was like Sherry had no mark for anything. Okay, so yeah, Carl just had a dash for July 21st. And he was absent excused, and Sherry had just a dash on both of the July dates, and she was absent excused on those. So I noticed those changes and will incorporate them if anyone had any others.
This is me. I'm sorry. This is I'm sorry. Consideration of minutes. Do we have any other amendments to them? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Wagner moves to approve the minutes of September 9th, 2021, my birthday.
Beck seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we tabled the commission, well, I didn't table.
No, you asked for to be on the agenda this month.
Do folks have thoughts about the historic preservation survey they want to talk about?
Ooh,
I can't hear.
the survey.
We could also defer again.
Yeah,
if we-
is there any chance of getting some extra time for Jessica rather than partialing it out to other staff people whom she has to train and inform? That doesn't seem very effective use of her time. It takes more time.
I mean, I agree. I mean, look, I've said this before with this survey. There are multiple priorities that we have asked for help on, and Jessica's time is limited to 20 hours a week. And they have been tabled by the neighborhood planning and development office. But when the home builders asked for a survey, they did it, right? I'm going to just keep saying that over and over again because it is so offensive to me. But here we are. We have it, and there was some good information in there. But I am going to make sure that everyone knows that history of this survey every time we talk about it. So I'm happy to talk about anything else after that, but I'm going to make sure that folks know that that's.
I was looking at the book when you said what offended you.
Yeah, and I didn't hear you because you dropped your voice.
I'm sorry. So the commission has over multiple times asked for more staff support to do projects over and over again.
I understand.
And we have been told we don't have staff support time. It's not possible. It'll take time. But when the home builders asked for this survey to get done, particular to our issue, the city staff found time to do it and did not ask for our approval and did it anyway. So I'm just,
Okay.
I'm pointing out people's behaviors, not assigning motivations. But I do think it's important to understand that and to know that. And having said that, we got some, I think, good information from the survey.
I think it was really interesting that it wasn't just we who were asking for more of Jessica's time and applauding her performance. Everybody wanted more access to her and really appreciated her input.
Yeah.
And does that carry any weight with the people who make those decisions?
I mean, the council is getting ready to start doing their budget conversations, so we certainly, and we have a council election coming up, so, as citizens, we can certainly do that, and I think we can have a conversation at a future meeting about how to talk to the council about how to do that. I don't know. It's going to have to come from the council. It's not going to come from staff.
Do we have any information about how many hours other towns with historic preservation people, like Jessica, how many hours they get for towns of comparable or larger size?
I don't know. I'm sure that is a known fact. I don't know it. I don't know who.
We have some information. We did an analysis of similar staffing back in 2015. When I started, the position was 15 hours, and it was a temporary position. And it changed to 20 hours within a couple months, and then the following year, it changed to a permanent position. And we had some staffing information for that discussion, that it could be updated.
Might be interesting.
Yeah. I agree, Cecile, that was the thing that, to me, that was the most. I felt like there was a handful of folks who had not great experiences, and the overall folks were either, the reason they had to move forward were largely they were frustrated with finding the right contractor or kind of budget constraints. I
did have one thought that stuck with me, which is that one of our biggest issues is windows, and there is nobody who does windows. So what can we bring somebody, can we recruit somebody from out of town? I mean, where is the window person, and how do we deal with this? Because it really is kind of unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
It might be something to work with, like the local high school and then the Kirkwood training,
Would be amazing.
to say that we specifically need people who can work on historic homes and their window needs.
Frank, do you know the guy? I think there's someone in, where does he live? Someone other than Larry Johnson who does windows nearby.
There's Warren Hanlon, but he builds from scratch. I know he's
Right.
He did some.
Right. No, Warren, but as far as repairing or rebuilding or simply just restoring, reglazing, I mean, you got different levels of.
But is there anybody who's taken that Bob Yap course that tells you how to install the insulation and inserted in rabbets and no?
Dubuque has a program, I think, that we've talked about before. I can't remember what it's called, but they do a lot of, in the high schools, they do a lot of training of folks.
Yeah, and that was the Bob Yap program that they're trained by.
And a lot of small businesses have sprung up from that, but we don't have that here. And I agree that that's. I would joke if I had the kind of patience to repair windows, I would do it. But I know my limitations. I've done it before.
I have 24 windows with no glazing on them. I mean, barely. It is not an easy task.
Yeah.
And
Terry Phillips of Washington does work on old windows, restoring them, glazing, and I think he's got kind of a crew that he is kind of trained in Washington. And yeah.
Even resources that are out of town. I think if we could provide people with that information easily,
Yeah, that was one thing they asked for, too, names of people qualified to work on old houses.
On the website. So we do have lists of contractors. We don't put them on the website just so that they aren't swamped.
Yeah.
We hand them out to anybody who asks, though. I inherited lists that I have been working on expanding as much as possible. Windows is one where I'm always looking for new contractors. And because of that, if I run across, say, even a handyman sometimes, I ask them if they know how to do windows and add them to the list if they can, say the right things and seem to know what's going on. But we have people on our list from Decorah, from Illinois. I mean,
Well, some years ago,
reached out to the state, and we got everyone that was, within that kind of a distance.
Well, some years ago, Friends of Historic Preservation put out a who-to list, but the contractors or whoever they were could self-nominate. There was no guarantee of the quality of the work. They just said, I'll do it, put me on the list. But you didn't really know if they were qualified or not.
Yeah, I've run across that in the files. It's very old, at least enough that several of the people are no longer with us.
I mean, the other issue, if someone says they're available, they're no good.
Yeah.
And if they say, I can come to you in about 2 years, then you can hire them.
There is a nationwide contractor shortage
Yeah.
right now. It's not just here.
Right.
And
yeah.
repair as well.
There is a Bob Yap presentation through the library. You can just click on a link through the library website, and he talks about the best supplies to use and materials. He doesn't actually show you how to do it, but I learned a lot just personally from that.
About
And-
what you want from a contractor.
The glazing, I do.
Right.
Yes, that's
the
gonna-
storm windows. I'm still working on those, just the glazing part of it, and it takes practice. There's a certain handhold,
It's a skill,
and
definitely.
pressure, and yeah.
This may be too complicated, but maybe worth thinking about. Is there a guild? Are there guilds of contractors that agree that these people are good and they could issue a brochure or have a website that lists who does what?
They have that in England, but I don't think they have it here.
Yeah, it's time we need it again.
Yeah.
Other conversations, we can obviously, maybe if there's interest to talk about this more, we can put it back on a future agenda item if folks have interest. But
Overall, it made me feel like people appreciated the service, though.
It made you what?
I felt that the Historic Preservation Commission was appreciated and the staff was appreciated
Yeah.
just by reading through the survey. That was nice to read.
Yeah.
I think when it's done right, it adds positively to the tax base, which is often a council sort of concern, but I'm not sure that they look at historic preservation that way. I think these cute neighborhoods bring people to the downtown, and they want to get out and walk the streets and see the cuteness or beautiful homes.
Was that your feeling?
Yeah, I thought that there are quite a few positive things, and I liked seeing how the people appreciated specific things. Frankly, it's been a little while since I've read that, but I made actually quite a few notes about different things, and there's always ways to, create some kind of like an educational thing. There are things that we could do to solve some of the problems as well.
all right, I think we're ready to adjourn. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, there's no information.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I do want to point out again that the November meeting was moved 1 week further back because Veterans Day falls on our normal day and City Hall is closed. So it is November 18th instead of the 11th.
A week before Thanksgiving. That's right. Right.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. Okay. All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn now.
Seligren, I move to adjourn.
DeGraw, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
I
We are
won't say
adjourned.
nay.